Hey everyone, Moshe Rothschild here, the Global Israel Alliance. Summary of the news from Israel for week ending December 27, 2019, the last report of 2019. Start with some great news. The last 48 hours, we've experienced a wave of torrential downpours and strong winds that swept throughout Israel. In many parts of the world, rain is a real damper and could be considered bad news. But here in Israel, it only rains between the holiday pretty much of Sukkot and Passover, and therefore whenever it rains, it's considered Gishmei Bracha, rain of blessing. And the Kinneret, which is the Sea of Galilee, has risen between 6 and 10 centimeters in the last 24 hours. Until now, the rain. The measurements from the rain stood this year at around 50% of the yearly average, meaning we were down 50%. But after the last 24 to 48 hours, we now have soared to over 110% of the region's expected quantity of precipitation. So that's really good news. This week, the International Criminal Court in The Hague announced that it's going to launch a probe into the Israeli war crimes against the Palestinians. Go figure. Our Prime Minister Netanyahu responded by saying the following, and I quote, "While we are moving forward in new areas of hope and peace with our Arab neighbors, the International Criminal Court in The Hague has taken a step backwards. It finally became a weapon in the political war against the state of Israel. The prosecutor's decision against Israel is absurd. Who are they accusing here? Iran? Turkey? Syria? No, Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. This is terrible hypocrisy." The Israeli Supreme Court will debate the issue of whether the Prime Minister Netanyahu can legally form a government while under indictment. Speaking of, yesterday in the news, today's Friday, so that would be Thursday, the Likud party, the party of Benjamin Netanyahu, had their internal election for the leader of the party, and Netanyahu faced off against Gideon Sa'ar, and Netanyahu, in a landslide victory, will remain the leader of the Likud party. Continuing in the news, Israel granted permits to Christians living in Gaza, and there are not a lot of them, probably about 1,000, and they're mostly Greek Orthodox. They granted permits for Christians living in Gaza to come to Bethlehem to celebrate Christmas. Iran, their top-rated chess champion, his name is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Alireza Firouzja. He's the world's second highest rated junior player, has decided not to play for Iran, not to play for his country, in an apparent reaction to Tehran's informal ban on competing against Israeli players. So, as we say, kol hakavod, all the honor to this young man. The United States Senate this week passed a $1.37 trillion spending bill, which included the annual $3.3 billion in security assistance to Israel. Some of the other features of this bill: $500 million was set aside towards the U.S.-Israel missile defense cooperation. Another interesting point is that the legislation allows the president to withhold a certain percentage of money of U.S. assistance towards UN agencies that act against the interests of the United States or a U.S. ally, including Israel. This week, Hadassah University Medical Center doctors in Jerusalem announced a breakthrough method to diagnose thyroid cancer with 94% accuracy. Previously, only 30% of test results were unequivocal. This week, rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel, and Israel responded with numerous attacks on terror targets in Gaza. And in Ashkelon, during an event campaign, Prime Minister Netanyahu on Wednesday night had to run into a shelter, and the IDF subsequently announced that the Iron Dome had shot down the missile that was fired towards Ashkelon. And let's see, the final story I'll share with you is that the Syrian state media and the Syrian opposition reported that missiles fired from Israel killed 3 Iranians near Damascus. What were the Iranians doing there? The target was a Syrian military position. And of course, we know Iran is trying to establish military presence in Syria in order to have share a border with Israel, to be able to launch terrorist attacks against Israel, and to create a contiguity of territory from Syria to Lebanon and then finally to the Mediterranean. That's about it. Tonight, Friday night, we will light before Shabbat begins, of course, the 6th candle for the holiday of Hanukkah, which celebrates the victory of the Maccabees over the Hellenistic Greeks. The Hellenistic Greeks emphasized physicality, the body, while the Maccabees realized that in reality, the true reality of the world is the spirit and the soul, and they were able to restore balance and restore the temple, and in the temple they found 1 jug of oil, enough to light for 1 day, and miraculously it remained lit for 8 days until they could produce more pure olive oil for the temple. And therefore we celebrate, we light every night to commemorate this incredible miracle, and we ask all of our listeners to do what you can to add more light to the world. Never say that this is the reality, I can't go beyond it. Just like that 1 jug of oil went beyond its physical reality, we too can go beyond what we think is possible. And we need to try and always do the impossible. And that's one of the great messages of Israel, that Israel never sees anything as impossible. Rather, impossible becomes I'm possible. So wishing everyone great Shabbat, great Hanukkah, or for those who celebrate, our listeners celebrating Christmas, well, it already passed, so we're wishing you, of course, a Merry Christmas. Shabbat Shalom to all.